Hi, it's Chris, and this is my review of tonight's reading of reading through the Bible in a year chronologically, September 16th. So the reading to this for this day is Ezra 4, 7, Ezra 7, and Ezra 8. This is the word that was spoken by Ezra. We get to see who Ezra is, and that he was well liked. That was really cool. But in the first part of it, we see where a letter was written from the people around Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, the Israelites were rebuilding the temple, and the people around it decided they were going to send a letter to King Artaxerxes. And so they did. And the letter was very accusatory, not a lot of fact. They were demonizing. Sound familiar today? Are we hearing some things about demonizing an individual that spoke truth, argued for truth? He spoke salvation. He spoke for Jesus. There's a man and he's being slandered by rhetoric and accusations and things where if you would take any time at all to see what he stood for, the accusations really don't stand up. But if you're just going with the rhetoric and leaning on that, now if you're offended by the way that he spoke truth and that you could not argue with him because he was well versed in a lot of things, he wasn't an easy guy to argue against. But he thought of things quickly, and he from what I've seen is very much very truthful. I can stand for a lot of things that he would argue for. I'm like, man, that's an awesome point when you see what he talked about. But that's just me. Anyway, so we see this letter that is accusatory and not necessarily truthful, and we see Artaxerxes back off. But then Ezra comes on the scene, gains favor with God by being obedient to God. It talks about him searching out God and wanting to teach the laws and decrees of the law, the rule of the Israelites. He wanted to teach them, and he took that to King Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes found favor on him, so he gave him a letter of recommendation for the area that nobody's going to mess with you. He gave them all kinds of stuff, all kinds of money and supplies, and sent him on his way. And he takes with him all kinds of volunteers to do this. And it's interesting, Artaxerxes is all for him, but Ezra's journey to Jerusalem, this is where it gets kind of interesting, I thought too, was that here he says in Ezra chapter 8, verse, 21, he says he's on his way there by the Ahava Canal. I gave orders for all of us to fast and humble ourselves before God. We prayed that God, would give us a safe journey and protect us, our children, and our goods as we traveled. And listen to this. For I was ashamed to ask the king for soldiers and horsemen to accompany us and protect us from the enemies along the way. Why would he be ashamed? The king has given him so much, but he was ashamed to ask for protection. Why? Because he says, after all, we had told the king, our God's hand of protection is on all who worship him, but his fierce anger rages against all those who abandon him. That's truth. That's what the scriptures told him, that the God of Israel is powerful and he protects his people. He stood on that promise, but he also humbled himself and fasted. So we fasted and earnestly prayed that our God would take care of us, and he heard our prayer. He asked for that. He asked for the promise that God made to them, but he didn't arrogantly ask. He humbly asked for the promise that God gave him. He said, God, you promised this. He didn't do that at all. So God, we told him this, and we trust that. And we're not going to eat for a time period. We're going to hold back. We're going to bow down. We're going to say, you are God. We trust you. But Lord, can you please be with us and protect us? That's what they did. And that's what they got. They got protection along the way. The gracious hand of God, it says in verse 31, The gracious hand of our God protected us and saved us from our enemies and bandits along the way. So we, in 32, we arrived safely in Jerusalem, where we rested for 3 days. And again, I think that's a real good example of how we should go to God, humbly, knowing what He promises, and being able to stand on that, but still being humble enough to ask for it, and earnestly pray for it. And the fasting is another important part of being humble before God. So these things come into play, and again, with that, the hand of God was on them, and they got cooperation. Again, really, really cool. It's neat to see how this will keep going. We're not too far. What are we? Another month away before we're in October. We get to get into the New Testament. So, reading through the Bible in a year chronologically, lots of fun. Join me again tomorrow. We'll read it live, around 9ish, somewhere in there. God bless.